Okay, it's a huge pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity to give a keynote lecture at the Thai Studies Conference, something that I always dreamt might be a possibility. I wish I was able to give this lecture under happier circumstances, that Thailand was in a better place and that I myself was perhaps better prepared for what I have to do, but let me try to rise to the occasion as best I can on this rainy morning and share with you some things that I've been thinking about and try to situate them in a larger context. It's quite appropriate that Ajahn Naramon just introduced me because she actually very modestly omitted to mention that we co-authored this article about urbanized villages and that the ideas that I'm going to talk about now started with fieldwork that she essentially carried out and that we then discussed and analyzed. Okay, so I don't normally do these things, but I was playing around in the middle of the night last night, and I decided to do my own version of the vicious cycle of Thai politics, which you may be familiar with from a classic 1981 article, which seems to come back to haunt us. So let me talk about my own sort of vicious cycle. There are a number of themes, a number of alliterative themes to this conference, and I guess we've had some connectivity and we've had some global Thailand. I'm going to have to talk about the conflict and a little bit about the conundrums, and let me explore those by using this vicious cycle. So let me talk about the first time, the last time, another last time, yet another last time, the lost time, and a question mark. The first time is 1985, and that's the first time that I came to Thailand and the first time that I came to Chiang Mai. I was staying in a fairly dingy hotel in Chinatown and really not enjoying Bangkok very much. And then I realized that I was right next door to the Hualampong railway station. And after a few days of Bangkok, I decided to take a train to Chiang Mai. And there my adventures with Thailand really began. I was staying at a small guest house near the old Taper Gate, and I became fascinated and intrigued by the place. Later, I traveled around and had a very strange encounter with a monk as I was getting onto a boat in Jantaburi. The monk said to me, "This morning in Bangkok we have a revolution, but don't worry about that, the government is no good." I thought, this is a very strange thing for a monk to be saying to me. I then followed the monk and spent a week at his temple. And that was my initiation into the mysteries of Thai politics, where this was the military coup, the abortive military coup of the 10th of September, 1985. So that was my first, and in fact my only Thai coup. Since then I've managed to be out of the country whenever a coup has taken place. But I realized that things might not be what they seemed. The conundrum confronted me at that point. What seemed to be a very enjoyable and relaxed and comfortable place to be was actually a little more complicated underneath the surface. 1986 was another time when I was back in Chiang Mai. It's the last time in the sense that it's the last time the Thai Studies Conference was held in Chiang Mai, and Dr. Turton was up here giving one of the keynote addresses on that occasion, I remember well. On that occasion, there was a very vibrant political and social atmosphere. Those of you who are here may remember the conference was split between two hotels, the Gatsun Gao and the Chiang Mai Orchid next door. Chiang Mai Orchid was full of activists speaking in Thai, having very excitable sessions. We were all full of optimism and excitement about the possibility for civil society and the transformation of Thailand in the wake of the May 92 crisis, which had shown that the people would take to the streets to support democracy, force out the military, and that military coups were a thing of the past. It was a great moment. It led into another wonderful Thai Studies Conference in Amsterdam in 1999 with a theme of civil society. Unfortunately, it all now seems quite a long time ago. Things have moved on, and what goes around comes around. I don't want to push the Titanic metaphor that Naramon sort of tempts me to invoke any further. So I'll come back to some of the other times in a minute. We'll revert to the vicious cycle at a later juncture. Okay, the Prime Minister's posed 4 questions about the country's political direction. I came up with 4 different questions. My questions really focus on trying to understand how we can get out of the present situation of authoritarianism, of restricted freedom of speech, expression, political opportunity. There's a big question for us is, in light of that, that's a picture I took during the referendum campaign last year, in light of the new constitution that we have and the possibility of continuing military influence over politics, will a post-election scenario actually bring about some substantive political change? Do we go back to a more open order along the lines of that more exciting open order of the 90s or, say, the 2000s? Or could we actually end up with a very different scenario, the institutionalization of what we have now, or even something worse? So in order to try to answer that question, I think we have to think about some other deeper questions which concern where the polarization in Thai society comes from and how that polarization could be overcome. Now, I don't profess really to have some answers. I have written this paper, and I asked the organizers to send it out and to post it in the Google Drive so that you can take a look at that. It was just published last week, so sorry for the delay in getting that out. If we take a look at the results of that referendum I just mentioned, what we see is rather familiar to us. This map, I can see Chris is nodding his head here, as this map looks rather like the maps that Chris has made, looking at the different election results that took place since 2001. We see an incredible degree of geographical polarization in the country. Yes, it's true that the referendum passed. It passed with just over 60%. It was a slightly better result than in 2007, but given the incredible suppression of debate around that referendum and the difficulty of expressing any no view, that's not altogether surprising. What is more disconcerting is that after this extended period of the restoration of national happiness, we still have so many people, 40% of the population, discontented, and slightly more discontented with question 2, which we could talk about. So what's going on here? I continue to insist, and not everybody agrees with me, that there's a substantive ethno-regionalist dimension to the pro-Thaksin movement. This is not just about capital and class. It's not just about completely abstract notions of identity or the appeal of certain kinds of populist policies. It may be all of those things, but there's a sense in which this is an opportunity for parts of the country that have felt their collective pre-colonial, as it were, identities suppressed, pre-Thai colonial, to go back to Professor Hertzfeld's talk the other day, that this is an opportunity for them to assert their status, their identity. So when we look at those maps, we see an incredible correlation between parts of the country geographically and political orientations. I want to mention briefly the Red Shirt Village movement, which is something people aren't talking about quite as much anymore, but I had the privilege of attending a proclamation of 17 Red Shirt villages in Ubon in 2012. This is one of the 17 posters that was being marched around at that event. Identical posters were actually used in many of these. So, there's a lot of argument among the different people who were behind the movement as to how many proclamations there were. Some people claiming there were as many as 30,000. There were certainly, I think, getting on for 20,000. And when we think about the number of villages that there are in Thailand, that means that at least a quarter, if not a third, of all villages in Thailand proclaimed some kind of notional, emotional independence from the Thai state during a fairly limited period of time between 2011 and 2014. And you can understand why the military and conservative elements in Thai society and the state would be rather alarmed about that, because if that happened in Britain or anywhere else, people would also be rather alarmed about it. So that degree of polarization that made it possible for up to a third of Thailand to proclaim itself a democracy zone with loyalty to somebody who is outside the country, this is a fairly extraordinary phenomenon. And it's not a phenomenon that has just quietly gone away, because we see it still reflected in the result of that referendum last year. So what's the problem here? Well, of course, there are lots and lots of problems, and I haven't got time to talk about all of them, and I can't even profess to begin to understand most of them, because some of these problems are very much in that conundrum category from the title of the conference. But a very big question is the one of voter registration. And the problem is a simple one. Millions of Thais And here you're going to ask me how many million, and unfortunately it's extremely difficult to figure out how many million, but it's a lot. I'm sure it's 7 million, it might be 10 million. Thais do not live in the places where they're registered to vote. There are huge numbers of people, and I test this constantly. I walk into 7-Eleven, I talk to the people who are driving taxis or are working in hotels and so on. I ask all of them, where do you come from? And then I say, where's your Tabian Ban? And it's never Bangkok. Northerners, people from Isan, in huge numbers are working in Bangkok and the 5 adjoining provinces. How many people actually are there in Bangkok? One of the big unanswerable questions. According to the 2010 census, 14.6 million. I think that has to be too low, because that doesn't count the non-Thais for a start, which is going to be at least a couple of million. So I'd say there have to be 18 million. Of course, we heard a very interesting presentation yesterday where Facebook said that they have 24 million users in Bangkok. Now, as far as we know, there aren't 24 million people. Some people have more than one Facebook account, but some people actually don't have a Facebook account. So maybe 24 million is, maybe Facebook has as an authoritative an answer as anybody. But that would be 1/4 to 1/3 of the Thai population is in or around Bangkok. But they're not supposed to be in or around Bangkok. They're supposed to be somewhere else where they don't reside most of the year. So we have an incredibly high level of urban concentration. And what happens to people who don't live where they vote? Now, if you look carefully at this picture, you may realize I took that one in Cambodia. I took that one during the last general election in Cambodia in 2013. These were all the workers from garment factories and the service sector in Phnom Penh going back to the provinces to vote. I know about that because I was stuck for 8 hours waiting for a ferry to cross the river with these people. There were tens of thousands of them there. They were all going back saying that they were going to show the people in their home villages what was going on in Phnom Penh and tell them to vote for the opposition. This is a parallel phenomenon to the Thai urbanized villager phenomenon. But if you don't live where you vote, see, we may be tempted to valorize these people, and that's the next problem. Are we going to valorize the urbanized villagers as a progressive force that we actually want to support and engage with and celebrate? Well, on one level, we could or we should, but don't forget these people are semi-disenfranchised. If you're not voting where you actually live, your status in the society is highly ambiguous and disconnected. You have a hybrid identity. It's a kind of a second-class identity. You're ripe for political mobilization, which means you're ripe for political manipulation, because sooner or later you're going to be left high and dry. Wallace, who's done this extraordinary work about China and done all the quantitative stuff that I never know how to do, where he looked at all kinds of developing countries, he's argued that there's a very strong correlation with the potential for unrest and political instability where you have excessive urban populations and large numbers of people pouring in from the countryside to the cities. And I live in Leeds much of the time. We just have to look at a place like Leeds or Bradford, the next city over where my father was born, 6 miles away, and you can see these cities went from a tiny population at the beginning of the 19th century to a huge population by the end of the 19th century. What happened in that case, in the Industrial Revolution in the UK, there was a process of political reform that lasted for the best part of 100 years, trying to incorporate those people into participating in the political system and enfranchising them. The good or bad feature of that was that those people could not really go back to the countryside. Their lands had been taken away, they'd been enclosed, and they were no longer accessible to them. But where you have people who still have an attachment and even land, family, and property in the countryside, they're in a much more ambiguous position. So, who are urbanized villagers? This is the article that Nauman and I wrote. They're poor farmers who are not poor and they're not farmers. That's the essence of it. They're poor farmers in the sense that they have farmland and they don't have as much money as other people and they may well be in debt. But they're not really poor because they have income, they have multiple sources of income, and this is the other problem. You know, surveys, a huge percentage of the Thai population self-identifies as farmers, something like 30%. But when you press people as to where they're getting their income from, they're not getting over 30% of their income from farming for the most part. Farming is an identity and a badge of honor rather than an actual occupation which keeps you in rice and in food for the rest of the year. We challenged other formulations, political peasants. No, these people aren't peasants in our understanding. They're also not cosmopolitan, so they can't be cosmopolitan villagers. They are not sophisticated enough to be cosmopolitan. They're not moving easily and comfortably between different places. They're in a more marginal and ambiguous situation. But they're people with urban aspirations. They want to upgrade their status. They want to become middle class. They want to run away from farming. They actually want to hand over the farming to legal or illegal migrants from Burma, Laos, and Cambodia so that they can get on with something else in or around Bangkok. They want to swap their motorbikes for pickup trucks. That's one of our lines from the original 2010 interviews. And I like this one. They want to stop taking orders and start giving orders. And this is the political aspiration here. So what happened to the urbanized villagers politically during the period from 2001 onwards, in the aftermath of that political reform process? They became the core vote for pro-Thaksin parties. Now, I'm conscious that the critical social scientists among you are going to accuse me of sliding too easily between urbanized villagers, red shirts, Thaksin supporters, northerners and northeasterners, and I realize I am doing that. So we can discuss that at greater length, and I can try to unpack those categories more. But for the time being, let's just go with this urbanized villagers term. So policies and slogans were really geared to their needs. They were the people who decided the election results in all the recent elections, including the ones that were annulled. They're the core no voters, as we saw in 2007 and 2016. That said, they've been hung out to dry by forces on both sides of the spectrum since the coup in 2014. These were the people who were supposed to stop the coup from happening, and who were telling me, even in the weeks before the coup, don't worry, it can't happen. We're going to go out onto the streets. We're going to get the guns from the army. They wouldn't dare do it. Unfortunately, none of that turned out to be true. All the pictures you're seeing are pictures I took. This is at an event that I'll talk about in a minute, but I put that one up because it's the Chiang Mai connection, demonstrating the northern angle. Okay, this is the other side, just to have a little balance here. These people are celebrating having prevented voting taking place at the Phayat district office right next to my former apartment building in Bangkok. What urbanized villagers are doing is rejecting the valorization of rural life. In other words, they don't want to go back and live some kind of simple sufficiency economy type existence in the countryside and get by with very little money. They want to do something extremely different. And as a result of that, they're viewed with suspicion. They are challenging Anek's classic distinction between the countryside and the city, because actually you've got a third force, as it were, that is politically very, very powerful, that's neither of the countryside exactly nor of the city. So for the military and conservative elements of the Thai state, urbanized villages themselves are a problem because they refuse to go into one box or another as being rural or urban. People are supposed to be either sophisticated metropolitans, or they're meant to be unsophisticated, uneducated, and easily manipulable rural people. So this is a threat potentially to peace and order, but it's, above all, it's a threat to binary thinking and a thinking of good people versus bad people and so on that pervades a lot of popular understandings. But urbanized villages are actually, in many respects, a source of dynamism. It's the drive of these people, it's their dreams, their ambitions that are fueling the economy and burgeoning sectors, and many of us in this room are involved in higher education, and we know about the expansion of Thai higher education in recent decades, and that much of it is driven by the aspirations of people who in the past didn't have any chance to access higher education, who now want to get degrees. We can talk about the quality and the content and what's going on in those institutions, but the phenomenon of burgeoning higher education is part of this process. They underpin the rapid transformation of the countryside, but they also underpin the rise of Bangkok itself. In doing so, they're challenging the dominance of the old elite. But most importantly, they outnumber, and that means that if they get organized, they significantly outvote the Bangkokians and those who are allied with the middle classes of the capital city. Okay, this is 2012. We're now in 2012, and it's another last time. It's a moment of sort of a historic, I felt on that day it was a kind of historic juncture. This is the 80th anniversary of the end of the absolute monarchy, at a time when the whole of Ratchadamnern and the area around the Democracy Monument was taken over by red shirts who were this time not protesting against the government or denouncing something that was going on, but actually celebrating the fact that the Yingluck government was in power and that they were given a certain kind of political space to act out their aspirations and to express their views. So this is a particular kind of moment. And at that moment, it was hard to imagine that Thailand could go back in a very different direction of denial about what was going on, because the palpable, tangible presence of these people on the streets was so intense. Nevertheless, if we looked carefully at what was going on, there were some complications. We did not have any representatives of the government taking part from the stage speaking. It was all civil society, or rather partisan, partial activists who were organizing this event. So it was an event that was, on one level, appeared to be sanctioned, appeared to be very open and public, and on another level, it was a kind of subversive and subterranean sort of activity, which didn't get a lot of coverage in the mainstream press at that point. Okay, so our urbanized villages, sadly, could not prevent, I already talked about the 2014 coup. They couldn't prevent the 2006 coup. They couldn't prevent the 2014 coup. We can't expect them either to prevent anything else that may be coming our way. They were not able to prevent the disappearance of the plaque commemorating the 1932 events. They would not be able to prevent Thailand moving further in an authoritarian direction after an election under a highly flawed constitution that can create all kinds of opportunities for the further institutionalization of entrenched power. So we may feel all kinds of mixed emotions about this group of people, but whatever we think about them and whatever we feel about them, they haven't been able to do what it was that they claimed to be setting out to do in many statements and much of the rhetoric that you would hear in speeches and performances that took place, say, on that day in 2012. They were not able to prevent Thailand moving back in a different kind of political direction. How could we actually get around that problem? What could be alternatives and ways forward to open up more political space of the kind that's so singularly lacking to us at the moment, as illustrated by the disappearance, the apparent rewriting of history before our eyes here? So I think what could be done is not for me to say, but I can suggest a couple of different directions. If you think that Thailand has an excessively over-concentrated urban population and that it's essentially undesirable for people to have this split identity between the countryside and the city, that you can't achieve political stability very easily in that situation, but you also can't institutionalize progressive politics, then what would you want to do about it? And it's funny that very few people have talked much about some of the obvious things that could be done. But when you come to think about it, it's not altogether surprising, because in the short term at least, nobody would appear to benefit from the kinds of changes that could be made. At the moment, we know that it's very difficult for these people I'm calling urbanized villagers often to register to vote in Bangkok. They live in informal housing, they live in factory dormitories. The owners of factory dormitories, a lot of landlords, are unwilling to allow the people living in those places to register to vote at those locations. So that means that there's a disenfranchisement taking place. In theory, the Gotomo and the provincial offices are dedicated to trying to get everybody registered to vote in the places where they actually are, but we know that there's a lack of enthusiasm in certain places, to put it politely, for getting these people really onto the legal books. So one way forward could be to try to change that, to get those people who really are committed to living in Bangkok to register to vote there. We already have all kinds of communities in Bangkok. It's a very complex, multicultural city. There are pockets of the city which are largely populated by people from places in the north and northeast. That could be institutionalized. You could create modes of rural-inflected community. You could give people more power to organize their own communities within a context of registering to vote in Bangkok and maintaining connections and affiliations with home area. The second thing is that for some people, there's another alternative, another option, and that is the option of becoming active rural citizens. And I talk quite a bit in the paper about this. One of the more intriguing phenomena in Thailand over the last few years has been the inexorable rise of the Tesaban Tambon, a contradiction in terms, the municipal sub-district. You go to most municipal sub-districts and you don't see anything terribly urban there, but you can meet the mayor and you can discover that every single Tesaban in Thailand is aspiring to become a municipality, and indeed that the Interior Ministry proposed a bill in 2012 which would have made every single sub-district in Thailand a municipality. So the urban is being abolished. The rural is being abolished. There won't be any villages left in Thailand very soon because they'll all have been converted to municipalities if we continue at the present trend, which is an interesting way of addressing the problem. The difficulty with this, as currently conceived, is that it's a Mahathai-style top-down exercise. If this was actually an exercise of empowering people to create small municipalities, which would have more social space, which would be more like the cosmopolitan zones of actually existing real urban spaces amid the rural, that would be something much more exciting and interesting. So if you could take the Tesaban Tambon trend and urbanize the rural. The rural is already being urbanized, but it's being urbanized in a very ad hoc and top-down way. If you could actually empower local people to urbanize the rural in different ways, then you could firm up an alternative identity. People wouldn't necessarily feel so obliged to go and work in other parts of the country. So here we are back to the vicious cycle. Another last time was 2012, and that's when I think that was the high watermark of a certain kind of political aspiration. That was the moment when the urbanized villagers came closest to believing that they had achieved some kind of substantive power. I spent 2012 doing field work in Thailand. I didn't completely realize at the time what a relatively good period that was. 2013, things obviously started to get bad. Yingluck became too successful. Her government was, I believe, sabotaged by her own brother, and the whole adventure of the Yingluck government started to unravel as a result of that amnesty bill, and a series of further episodes led us to 2014, yet another last time. The last coup. It was also the last Thai Studies Conference in Sydney. We have Jonathan just talking to as another of the keynote speakers at that event. Again, we were in a more optimistic mood despite the political turbulence that was going on in Thailand, because don't forget, it was just a few weeks before the coup. We hadn't actually had the coup yet. We thought it would be easier to have this event here in Chiang Mai than it's perhaps turned out to be. We thought more people would be able to come and that we'd be able to have a more open debate about a wide range of subjects. 2016, the lost time. I have a research grant to study the 2016 general election in Thailand. Haven't been able to make much progress. Did a bit of a pilot study about the referendum, but clearly there isn't going to be a 2017 general election. I hope there's going to be a 2018 general election. If not, I'm afraid the money's going to have to go back where it came from. So 2016 was sort of the time of lost opportunities when things could still be rescued. It's getting harder to see exactly how we can get back. It's also the year when I accepted the invitation to give this keynote, hoping that by the time we got to this day, I would be able to tell a more positive story about the direction in which Thailand was moving, rather than the somewhat dark and dispiriting one that we've been encountering in some respects from a political point of view over the past few days. So 2016, where are we now? I'm afraid the conflict hasn't gone away, and perhaps we're back in a moment of conundrum. Back in '85, I realized I had no idea what was going on here. Sometimes I wonder if I have much more idea, having gone round with this vicious cycle. I thought I knew where Thailand was going at various junctures over the past 30 years or so. It's difficult for me to put my hand on my heart and say that I have complete confidence about where the country is going politically now. We seem to be trapped in this pattern of polarization. I do believe there are ways out of the polarization. I do believe that a conference like this is a place where we can create political space, which is why I'm here saying these things. I've really enjoyed the fascinating papers and presentations that we've had over the past few days. So I hope that we can continue to work on trying to find answers to these problems. The urbanized villages piece is just one small part of the piece, but to me it's a kind of window into a whole set of interlocking complex issues that we really need to find ways of talking about. And most importantly, we need space to talk, and that's what we find it very, very hard to achieve here at the moment. Thank you very much.